Book 5, Salem, Safety Assured, Leaving East of Medicetti. Chapter 8, of Knowing the World Will Never Find You Again. When they finished eating, Asrar brought to Mari a grubby piece of parchment. She glanced first at Shem, who nodded. Absolutely, it's for her after all. Mari took it gingerly, recognizing that it was old. She wrote it the night she came here, Asrar told her softly. She wouldn't speak to anyone until she had written it all down. She told me later that she didn't want to risk forgetting anything, and had hoped that she might be the one to deliver it. But since she passed away almost 5 years ago now, Mari read the words scrawled hastily on the parchment. Some day will come for you. There will be a day when you will be ready to leave it all behind and embrace the truth. But not for many years still, I suspect. Until then, think of this night never again. Should your mind ever find itself surprised by this memory, tell yourself it was just a vivid dream, for that's all it really is. You can practice looking at the world in different ways, preparing your mind to realize you know really nothing at all. Looking at the sky and realizing it changes minute by second. But until that someday comes, nothing will ever quite make sense. That's all right. But when that day does come, everything will hit you with such finality and power, you will never again be able to forget it or deny it. You will find the truth and run to it. For you, Mrs. Shin, until we meet again, so that we will remember together. Signed, G. Young. She frightened me so much that night, Mari smiled sadly. I realized she did it on purpose. I wasn't ready, and she knew that. She saw right through me. Asrar put a hand gently on Mari's shoulder. But she knew you would run here someday. What was her first name? Galena, Asrar said. Galena Young. Wished I'd known her as well as I knew her husband. Someday in paradise you will, Asrar said, as surely as she knew the sun would rise. That parchment's never left this resting station. Shem, a couple others, and I have memorized it in order to tell it to you. Now it's yours to keep. Galena always intended for you to take it with you. I'll take it to Salem, where we all belong, Mari said, as she put it in her pocket next to the family lines no one knew she had. After breakfast, Asrar showed them to the chamber with the net slings like Jatsi had ridden in, suspended on overhangs of the boulders. The area was darkened and cooled by the surrounding rock, spacious enough for up to 50 people to sleep. You'll find these provide the best napping options on the rock, she told them. As Perrin helped Mari into a higher net, he said to Shem, I'll take the first watch, then will you take the second? Shem shook his head. You haven't slept more than a handful of hours in the past 2 nights. Neither have I, he reminded him. We both sleep. We're perfectly safe here. Perrin looked at him dubiously. Are you absolutely... His voice trailed off as Shem gave him a meaningful look. I will trust you. This place is safe. Shem smiled, climbed expertly into his litter, and stretched out. But Pato struggled to get into his. First he tried a higher one, then decided to climb into a lower one. Moving his stiffened leg upward didn't seem to be something he could do yet, even with the herb rub for his saddle soreness. Shem slipped out of his litter. Like this, he said, as he stretched open the litter to let him crawl in. Thanks, Pato whispered, rolling away from him. Hey, Shem tipped the sling to force Pato back to him. I realize you're still trying to figure out how to think of me, and that's all right. Since yesterday morning, your whole world has been spinning, and it still hasn't stopped, has it? I'm sorry I was rough on you earlier, but I promise Salem will be worth it. Pato nodded wearily and warily. You were looking for a sign or message last night, weren't you? Shem said, as if reading Pato's soul. "It never works the way you expect it to," Shem told him. "But the Creator sends us signs every day, wanting us to see things as He sees them, not as we want to see them. It's up to us to recognize His messages to us for what they are." Pato knew he was seeing one right now. Shem put his hand on Pato's chest, on top of the envelope. "You brought them, didn't you? Your grandparents? I felt Ralph come by to check on you. He and the others were never far from us." Before Pato could ask what Shem meant by the others and how far they were, Shem said, "Now rest, boy. Your new life is just around the corner and over the mountain and through some fields and, well, your backside really doesn't want to know right now." Shem patted him and went back to his net. Pato put a hand on his chest and tried to slow his thumping heart. Perrin climbed into his net under Mari with a weary grunt. "I'll just rest my eyes," he murmured, "because I don't see how I can sleep until we're out of view of Edge." Mari smiled down at him and nodded. She lay back in the sling and stretched out to feel it support her completely. Before she could sigh in relaxation, she heard a familiar snore under her. "Ah, just great," Pato mumbled from his net. "With Father snoring, no one will be able to—" And suddenly he was silent. Shem chuckled quietly. "Good boy, Pato. He was always easy to get night-night." "Azrar didn't put anything in those biscuits to put them to sleep, did she?" Mari asked. Azrar, retrieving supplies in the nearby cavern to prepare midday meal, uttered a quiet but affronted, "Oh, of course not." "Just kidding, Azrar," Mari said, waving her hand. "Take it as a compliment that my family hasn't been this exhausted or this contented in a very long time." "If she did have something to put people to sleep," Jothan rumbled quietly from his net sling, his eyes already closed, "I would have insisted she put it in our 4 sons' dinners each night." "It's the sleep of peace," Barb said drowsily on the other side of Mari, "of knowing the world will never find you again." Mari grinned and glanced at Jatsi, lying in her litter above deck. She looked like she could never sleep again, but preferred to just watch her already dozing husband as she held his limp hand in hers. "I'll keep watch," Jatsi assured her mother. "I'm quite rested, although I don't know what I'm watching for." The students of Upper School Number 3, sitting outside on the benches, watched yet another group of soldiers run by. 2 paused in front of the cluster of teenage boys, and Chami said, "No, we haven't seen the Shins or the Briders. That's what we told the last 7 groups of soldiers who asked." The soldiers darted off in another direction, as Chami casually saluted them away. His friend sitting with him chuckled. "Why did we even come to school today?" one of them asked. "Because old Hagek would come by each of our houses again begging us to come if we didn't," said Chami. "He has to fill the seats, you know. Really, this is pathetic, them racing after nothing." "Not nothing," Leonard said defensively. "There was noises during the night, and shouting and running and—" Chami waved that off. "Oh, hours ago. I heard they weren't even real garters. My father said that when they attacked years ago, they actually killed people. But these garters, they just let loose a few chickens and shouted, 'Can't catch me,' like it was a game. But the soldiers are panicked as if half of them were massacred last night." "Well," Leonard began, his shoulders twitching in loyalty to the army he hoped to join, "they didn't know that. Maybe there are dead soldiers somewhere." Chami rolled his eyes. "The sooner all of this nonsense is over with, the better. Hagek's lectures are so dull, I'm bored to tears. It'll be interesting to hear Mrs. Shin's take on all of this." Leonard was stunned. "What, you want Mrs. Shin back?" "Of course," said another boy next to him. "She's the only teacher who doesn't read the scripts." "Chami," he said knowingly to his friend, I don't think Leonard's ever caught on. Caught on? Leonard asked, looking at the 6 boys around him. Caught on to what? Chami patted him on the shoulder. How well did you do on the end-of-year exam? Leonard smiled proudly. Good enough to get out of Mrs. Shin's class next. He stopped when he saw Chami shaking his head. You're doomed. Now you'll have to take the regular classes, full of administrative drudgery and departmental dullness. You passed yourself out of a real education. What are you talking about? Leonard, another boy, patted him on the head like a dog. We've all thrown the tests. Failed them on purpose so that we could be in Mrs. Shin's class. I worked out the math a few years ago, another boy told him. Leonard was shocked. You know math? Of course. You see, if we fail 54% of the test, which, according to the matrices established by the Department of Instruction, which matrices I steal from Hegeck's office each year so that I can run the numbers, you know math? How else can I tell the others how many questions to get wrong to statistically keep us in her class? You know math on purpose, and do badly on purpose? You, Leonard, said Chami slowly, as if talking to a stupid goat, are one of the few who really belongs there. At least half of us are there on purpose, because she's the only teacher who actually teaches. She's also the only one who listens. Next year, we'll all take our final exams and pass them astonishingly well, with the highest marks possible. It's not that hard, really. Students have been failing on purpose for years to get into Mrs. Shin's class, then passing with nearly perfect grades at the very end to go into a university. You are one of the rare dumb ones to get in naturally. You didn't even have to steal anything like I did and allow yourself to get caught in order to be considered a special case. Congratulations. Leonard's shoulders sagged as the boys around him laughed. You really liked her as a teacher? You didn't? Well, I don't know. It's not like she was mean or anything, just kind of... Oh, Leonard. When you have to sit in regular classes next year, you'll realize what you gave up. But she didn't teach to the test, Leonard said, suddenly feeling confused and stupid. Yeah, we know, Chami said. Thank the Creator, right? Leonard's head snapped up. You believe in the Creator, too? He was made up. The administrator said that. Chami sighed loudly. Leonard, you really believe everything the administrators claim? Someday you'll make a great addition to the army of Idemia. Maybe even an administrator's aide. Just as Leonard was about to round on them for their unsupportive attitudes, he noticed Mr. Hegeck coming through the gate to the school grounds. Clusters of students stopped their gossiping and stared at Edge's director of schools, who was shaking and pale. His gaze drifted from one group to another until he finally rested on Leonard, Chami, and the rest of Mrs. Shin's special cases. Everyone, he said in a trembling voice, please step inside. We're supposed to stay outside, one girl informed him, in case garters are still hiding in there. The garters are gone. It seems that they had one goal, and they accomplished it early this morning. His trembling increased. Please get inside, and I'll tell you about it. Chami was already on his feet. Is it about the Shins? Mr. Hegeck, what about Mrs. Shin? Just get inside, Chami. I'll tell you everything if you just get inside. Chami glanced back at his peers, whose bleak expressions reflected his own. The news was bad. In another minute, Leonard would come to that conclusion as well, but maybe after Hegeck told them what it was. Come on, boys, said Chami somberly. I have a feeling we won't be hearing Mrs. Shin's side of this, ever. When Azrar woke everyone up about 4 hours later, Jatsi was smiling at her mother from her sling. Now I know what I needed to watch for. She pointed to her father. Azrar hadn't woken him yet, but at Jatsi's request had waited for everyone else to be up to see his reaction. I don't believe it, Mari whispered. Pato grinned. Now that's a miracle. I have to agree, Pato, Shem smiled. He'll never get rid of it, will he? Deck chuckled. Perrin, Mari said softly, reaching down to touch his arm. Perrin, it's time to put out the cat. With eyes still closed, he automatically petted the cat. The cat purred. Perrin's eyes flew open and he looked at his chest. The cat? The cat meowed wearily at him. How did... What? His family laughed. He wandered in about an hour ago, Jatsi told them. His feet are pretty roughed up. Perrin struggled to sit up in his sling and lifted the limp animal to inspect him. Oh, you've had a hard night, haven't you, boy? Perrin said when he saw his bloody paws. How in the world did you find us? It's not the first pet to follow us to Salem, Jothan said. He can come all the way. Jatsi, he could ride with you. Of course, Jatsi squealed. Half an hour later, as they prepared to start on the trail again, well-rested and well-fed, including the cat, who took care of the leftover ham, a jovial young man in mottled green clothing emerged from one of the gaps in the rock. It's about time, his Aunt Barb sighed in relief. Kieran, Shem called. How's everything in the world? Kieran beamed. I'm pleased to report that the fort's falling apart, and soldiers are weeping in terror at the edge of the forest, He looked over at Perrin. I'm sorry, sir, it's just that... Perrin nodded to the scout. Understood. Actually, I'm rather glad to hear that news myself. Kieran relaxed. I can't believe it! The Shin family is here! So good to meet all of you! He eagerly pumped Perrin's hand. Oh, Azrar, I almost forgot. Half the scouts should be here soon, and they'll be starving. To Perrin, he said, that was the message they sent me here to deliver. Wow, I just said that to Perrin Shin, and that's Mari Shin. He pointed at her. She snorted in response, and her children chuckled. So, was it messy? Azrar asked, trying to keep Kieran focused. Still haven't accounted for all of our men yet, Kieran said, snatching a biscuit remaining from breakfast. But we're pretty sure everyone got out of edge, and we're making sure all the soldiers are out of the forest. They lost 6 men in there, and a few horses. And that's Pato, isn't it? But Perrin ignored his son's sniggering and massaged his forehead. Kieran, do you know if Afra got out? Yes, sir, he did. And may I make the first of many apologies? We didn't expect any of the soldiers to actually enter the forest. Hi, Briders. Wow, they're all here. Sorry, I know. Report. Dorman sent most of our garters into the village to startle chickens, hoping to attract the soldiers, but then Thorn ordered those groups into the trees. Well, that was unexpectedly brave and stupid. That about sums up Thorn, Perrin sighed. Good one, Kieran pointed at him. Hey, he's funny. Who would have thought? When he caught Shem's glare, he cleared his throat and said, We've been playing catch-up ever since, trying to make the chaos work for us. Something we learned from you, Mr. Shin, during Moorland. Perrin frowned. Chaos? The explosions in Moorland, sir? No one anticipated that. But together we made the best of the chaos, taking out every last garter. Dorman alone flushed out about a dozen that were hiding further west and took care of. He raised his eyebrows meaningfully. Most of them until we got him assistance. He may be even more fearsome than you, sir. Perrin smiled wanly. So, Dorman's in charge of all of this? Part of it, Shem said. We each had our responsibilities. Jothan's was to get you out and escort you up here. Barb and Kieran's was to deliver Jatesy, and I was supposed to keep the soldiers out of the way. Come to think of it, he scratched his head, Dorman was the only one doing his original task, directing the garters. Perrin chuckled. Well, since I'm a man who frequently was the only one doing what he was supposed to. He ignored Shem's loud scoff. I look forward to chatting with Dorman about what should have happened last night. May have to wait, Kieran said. He hasn't reported in yet, but he's probably making a last sweep of the area. He's very thorough. Cousin Dorman knows the forest better than anyone, Azrar said. Cousin Dorman? Pato asked, raising an eyebrow. We share the same ancestor, Azrar smiled. The second King Quirrell. And besides, we are all family. About half of Salem has claimed Dorman as a cousin, Jothan explained. He never married or had children. How sad, Jatesy said. No, Jothan corrected her. How deliberate. He was worried that if he had children, one of them might discover his ancestry and want to come to the world and become king. Dorman wanted to make sure the reign of kings died with him. I've heard him call himself the gatekeeper, Barb said. The gatekeeper between what his ancestors created and the people who freed him from it. He rarely comes to Salem, Azrar explained. While he knows none of us hold him accountable for what his ancestors have done, still he feels a sense of guilt. Salem loves him. Many of us have tried to give him our last names, but he'd rather stay in the forests to keep us secure. Now I really do want to talk to the man, Perrin said. He's done more good than all of the kings put together. Jothan nodded. That's what Rector Young has told him many times. When Dorman comes to Salem, he either stays with us or with Young. I know they had plans for dinner tomorrow night. Pato began hesitantly. Did Woodson get out all right? Kieran beamed. Yes, and quite unhappily, too. Something go wrong? No, Kieran chuckled. That's the problem. We didn't need to use him. He ran around and got some soldiers to chase him, but we never needed him to play Pato Shin. Well, I'm glad he's all right, Pato said. Kieran, Perrin said, you and the other Salemites have risked so much to get us out. If we were any other family, we'd still do it, Kieran exclaimed. That was the most exciting move we've ever had. We'll be talking about it for years. And it's great to finally meet you, sir. He pumped Perrin's hand again. Well then, Perrin said, smiling at the man's infectious grin. I'm glad we could provide you some entertainment. Turning to Jothan, Kieran said, I can finish taking the Shins up to Salem so you can stay here with your wife. But Jothan shook his head. You haven't slept since yesterday, have you? I just had a good nap. I know you're eager to spend some time with the former colonel, but falling asleep on the horse carrying his daughter won't impress him much. Kieran blushed and Shem laughed. Jothan put a large hand on the young man's shoulder. Remember, he's coming to Salem to stay. You'll have plenty of opportunities to overwhelm him with your questions. I am intrigued to hear about your system, Perrin assured Kieran. I have questions for you as well. Kieran nodded eagerly. Great! I hope by the time I get there, everyone else hasn't already talked your ear off. Perrin squinted. Everyone else? Shem cleared his throat at Kieran. Aren't you supposed to be getting something to eat and then a nap? Of course, of course. Kieran grabbed Perrin's hand one more time. Again, so great to meet you, all of you. Barb came over and took her nephew by the arm. Really, you're going to love Salem, Kieran called as his aunt dragged him away. He waved vigorously at the shins and briders, who couldn't help but grin back at him. Azrar pushed him firmly onto a rock, set a plate of food on his lap, and Barb shoved a sandwich into his mouth. "You'll have to forgive Kieran," Shem said. "He gets a bit excited. That's why he isn't part of the scouting corps. His enthusiasm is perfect for dealing with the wounded or encouraging a mother, though." Perrin folded his arms. What was he talking about? Everyone else wanting to meet me? Shem smiled easily. "Perrin, a few stories have gotten around. Remember, we've moved thousands of people to Salem over the years. A few people knew of you and your father and grandfather. Now," he said, eager to shift the topic, "we need to get you there." Perrin looked dubiously at his wife. "A few people?" Mari patted his arm. "After the first days," she whispered to him, "the excitement will wear off, and I'm sure no one else will remember us. We'll be able to live that quiet, anonymous life you've never experienced." "I hope you're right," he grumbled back. "Shem and his stories," he murmured as he went to retrieve Peto's horse and Clark. Mari and Peto stared at the approaching animals, then exchanged miserable glances. "Mother, how far do you think it is to Salem?" "As far as my behind is concerned, it's already too far." Perrin returned and smirked. "It's time, my darling wife. I am very sorry." But the quiver around his lips suggested otherwise. "You could try side saddle for a while." "Or she could use this," said Barb, bringing an overly thick sheepskin. "Barb, bless you," Mari cried. "Can I bless you too?" Peto asked. "I suppose I can spare another for the future stud of Salem." Dec secured Jatesy in her sling between the pack horses, the cat lounging around her belly, while Jothan and Barb checked all the connections. "So, Shem," Dec tried to say coolly, "just how far is it?" "I don't think I should tell you yet," Shem said, adjusting a stirrup on his horse. "It would spoil the surprise." Mari glared at him from atop Clark, still uncomfortable even with her new padding. "Come on, Shem, you can tell us now," Perrin said. Shem put on a thoughtful expression as he mounted his horse. "It's not too far. How's that?" "Not good enough," Perrin growled. "It will have to be," Shem said, and he nudged his mount out of the chamber. He led them through twisting rock passages for several minutes, until the tunnel emerged at the top of a wide boulder field. Between the boulder field and the slope of the mountain was a narrow channel, wide enough for a couple of horses to ride side by side. The height of the rock was just above the heads of the horses, allowing riders to see over the edge if they stood in the stirrups. They continued east until they reached a canyon which Mari never gave more than a passing thought. Shem paused at the mouth of it, turned around his horse, and gestured to the distance. "Your last clear view of edge. No one can see us up here, even if your spyglass in the office is trained precisely. The angle of this channel between the rocks and the mountain slope obscures the horses." Jatesy, lounging in the sling, shook her head. "It's not home anymore, Shem." Dec nodded. Peto looked toward the south. "Is that the fort at Mount Scene?" "Good eyes, Peto," Shem said. "After a storm blows through, the views are quite clear. The smudge beyond that is rivers. And when the angle of the sun is just right, you can see distant flashes of light. It's sunlight bouncing off a large bank of windows in vines." Perrin twisted in surprise. "Vines?" "When the conditions are perfect," Shem said, "you can just make out the tallest buildings in Idumea. 80 miles really isn't that far, Perrin. In the next few weeks, you'll realize just how short a distance it is." Mari winced. A few weeks? She'd be part of the horse in a few weeks. "No one in the world really understands how small the world, as you called it, really is," Shem told them. Perrin looked down at Edge, his eyes hopping from one tower to another. "No banners flying," he murmured to Murray. "Edge looks quiet. They must have given up trying to find us." From that distance, it didn't even look like Edge, but some sleepy little village they'd never met and didn't care to know. "I've seen enough, Shem," Murray said. She felt Perrin nod behind her. But seeing that Pato was still staring at the plain before him, Shem said, "Pato, everything all right?" "Just strange thinking that from here you can see rivers. There's the fort to the side, and somewhere in there are the soldiers and horses and even Colonel Karna." Perrin sighed. "Brillin won't know yet. About us, I mean. But he will soon." "He will," his son exhaled. "He'll hear from others that we're gone," Perrin said dully. "I'm sorry, Brillin, and Gary, and Grayson. It'll come as a shock, but so would hearing that Genev is arresting you and trying you for sedition," Shem reminded them. Are we good to go now?" he said to Pato, who gave him a reluctant nod. Shem grinned. "Then let's go exploring." He nudged his horse to head to the mouth of the canyon, which was narrower than Murray expected, barely wide enough for the rushing river on one side and a faint, narrow trail on the other. "Here's the Edge River," Shem announced. "Ever wonder where it came from?" Perrin shrugged. "Not really, although I should have. I just never questioned it." "Me neither," Murray admitted. "Never occurred to me that it actually started somewhere." "But the river comes out of the forest west of Edge, and we're east," Perrin pointed out. "That's because the river," Shem called loudly to be heard over the slopping of the water, "goes under the boulder field. Look downstream and you'll see where it vanishes into a cavern. Our scientists speculate that the river probably pours into an underground lake. That's a very large pond, by the way, below the boulders, then overflows to make the river again on the western side." Murray didn't know how to process any of that. "I never even considered an underground lake." "I didn't understand all of that," Perrin confessed in her ear. "Suddenly, I feel very stupid. And just a few days ago, I told you I knew everything." The faint trail went up to the left, switching back and forth and climbing rapidly. Murray now understood why the horses needed time to rest, even more than their riders. As they rode up the mountainside at a surprisingly rapid rate, Murray took in the scenery. It was all that she had imagined. No, she'd never imagined this. Her mind was simply too simple. So instead, she decided that the world beyond Edge was everything that she had hoped. No, that wasn't true either. How could she have hoped that trees, pines taller and straighter than anything in Idumea, grew all the way to meet the rocky cliffs at the top? What did they call the top of a mountain, anyway? And those trees, what were those, with white bark and twists and turns in the trunks? And there were grasses, thick and bright green, forcing their way through the melting snows, and jagged rocks jutting out here and there, and the only way Murray could figure out why they didn't roll down the slope was because they were part of the mountain itself, some skeleton of rocks connected with extended fingers, then covered with dirt and growing things. "It feels like it's alive," she breathed. She didn't know she said it so loudly until Shem, 2 horses ahead, turned in his saddle. He gave her a quizzical smile and said, "The mountain? Oh, most definitely. Everything's alive, Mari." She didn't know whether to be comforted by that or disturbed. But because there was a smile on her face, she chose the former. "It's beautiful," she decided as they came around a bend. "I've always thought so, down in Edge. But seeing the mountains at these angles, it's—" She didn't have the words to describe the tightness of the excitement in her chest that made her hands grip the saddle horn to keep them from shaking. She needed names and descriptions, but all she could come up with was the hopelessly vague, "Beautiful." Some fanciful part of her hoped the mountain heard her, accepted the compliment, and allowed them to pass in peace. While beautiful, it was all a bit strange and threatening, especially when they had to duck under an overhanging rock. It didn't help that Perrin reached up, snapped off a bit of the edge, and showed it to Mari as they passed underneath. "Could crumble away at any moment," he whispered. "Or maybe not. What do I know? I'm still not entirely sure what a lake is." Mari examined the splinter of rock, worried that the mountain had felt her husband snap off one of its cuticles. "I don't think you should do that. You might wake it up." "I might what?" She chuckled at herself. "Never mind. Stop breaking the scenery. We're new here." "I always thought of the mountains as a hostile place," Deck admitted behind them as he evaluated the emerging grasses. "Maybe because I could never figure out how you could plant potatoes up here. But you could let cattle wander and graze." "That's my husband. It's beautiful as long as it's practical," Jatesy laughed. Pato spun around in his saddle, his eyes ready. "Pato, don't say it," Jatesy warned. "I was just going to say that it's so wonderful that the two of you managed to get together. Now, what's wrong with that?" Shem laughed. "Very tactful, Pato. And Deck, at the end of planting, we do bring up the cattle to graze here until harvest." "Amazing," Deck said. "Oh, sorry, that's Perrin's word. How practical." The Shins chuckled until a strange cry far above them caused Mari to look up into the clear sky. Behind her, Perrin's head also snapped up. "I see it," he breathed. "What is it?" Jatesy asked, shielding her eyes to spot what had captured her parents' attention. "Ah," Jothan said, pointing nearly straight up for Jatesy's benefit. "It's enjoying the thermals rising from the canyon. Many birds of prey will coast along in tight circles, riding the columns of warm air that rise as the canyon heats up. My father, a biologist who specializes in ornithology, speculates that they're simply having fun." Mari leaned to see Jotham behind her, who had become unexpectedly talkative. "Your father's a what? Who specializes in what?" Barb chuckled. "A scientist, Mari. We'll teach you all of our extra words when we get to Salem. There's a book." "Yes, sorry about that," Jothan said, suddenly animated. "Forgot that you don't know our terminology." Before Mari could work out the meaning of that word, Jothan continued, "My father's always been fascinated by birds and flight. He spent many weeding seasons in this canyon, gauging temperatures and recording behavior. I helped carry his equipment when I was a boy and became a bit of a birder myself." "So what is it?" Jatesy asked again, as she spotted the bird drifting higher without any effort except to tip its wings. It cried again, its long screech echoing in the canyon. No, cheered is more like it, Mari decided. Behind her, Perrin sighed happily. "It's a falcon, Jates, soaring free and far away." His voice grew gruff. "No barns in sight to keep him trapped." Mari leaned back and rested her head against his chest. "Absolutely. That's a falcon, which is—" "Actually," Jothan's voice carried up to them, "that's a larger bird, likely a hawk. It's a common mistake." He launched into a lecture worthy of his father. "But you can tell by the wingspan and the configuration of the tips, falcons are smaller birds, although people tend to think otherwise. But the fact is—" "Hey, Jothan," Shem interrupted him from the front of the line. He noticed that Perrin was still watching the whatever bird with a combination of longing and joy. "For today, let's just call it a falcon." All right. It's a falcon," Jothan said with much less zeal. But Perrin didn't notice. He didn't notice anything but the bird soaring higher, effortlessly, and cheering every once in a while for no particular reason except that it could. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.